Little known fact, I was president of my school's chess club. The other night, my husband was poking around on Kickstarter and found this game. And it was kind of like chess, but also it was an oracle deck and involved a lot of mythology and symbolism. I was really intrigued. So I reached out to the creator, Daniel J. Drake, and he agreed to sit down with me and talk about the creation of the game.
Anthromancer is a game, an oracle, an album, and a myth. It is a multifaceted art experience that happens to take the form of a tabletop board game. The centerpiece of it, really, like what it started out as, is a board game called Mercenarium. But using the same components as Mercenarium, I was able to integrate an entirely original oracle. I was able to tie in a concept album that builds on the themes of all the cards, the meanings, and there's an original mythology that basically takes the whole thing, recontextualizes it, and makes it into, hopefully, a really deep, valuable experience that won't just sit on your shelf and collect dust.
When my husband showed me the Kickstarter, I was just like, this seems like so much more than just our card game. Like it feels like it has weight and significance. So I'm definitely really excited to explore it that way as well. So I think the first thing I'd really love to know is kind of where you started with all of this, the occult, esoterica, spirituality. Like, how did you kind of enter into that?
That's a great question. And I talk about it a lot when I talk about like developing this project, because developing it is what put me on the path to it. Basically, I wanted to make a card battle game, like Magic the Gathering, or like I played Pokemon when I was a kid. And for whatever reason, that impulse was still in my brain and came out at one point. I was on a plane home from doing pancake art and TV in Brazil.
Wow. Okay.
I just took out my notebook and was just like, yeah, let's make a card game. And I started to do all these different mechanics that were kind of just aping the old systems from those games I used to play. And they were really unsatisfying, and they seemed like they'd be really hard to pull off as like an independent entrepreneur. I decided, throw that out. Let's just build a game around a more traditional deck of cards. And that's what really started it. Because at that point, I decided I wanted to do research into why card, like they have an aesthetic, right? Like there is the playing card aesthetic. And I was kind of like really curious, like where does that come from? And you do a couple Google searches, and then before you know it, like you're finding out about Tarocchi and Renaissance Italy, and you're finding out about the elemental associations and between the four suits, layered symbolism that just already exists in this gaming artifact. It started out as just a board game, but as I developed it, like I see all these consonances, I see all these relations between, like I learned about the Platonic solids, and then I got into sacred geometry and like found out about, because the elemental associations are there. And so I don't know if you're familiar with Rudolf Steiner, but I found some of his books, and probably the most profound moment for me during the development of Anthromancer was reading Rudolf Steiner's ideas about how the creative process can be contextualized as spiritual experience. Because in a way, when you flow as you're creating something, it's almost like your brain goes away and you're just like inspiration, imagination, these things, where the hell do they come from? Like I've always thought of myself as a very skeptical person, but working on Anthromancer destroyed that.
That's really interesting. I mean, like, that's a really fascinating journey, because I definitely, I was curious what came first, the game or divination system, or, however you want to classify, dragonfruit. But it seems like it was like a really holistic process. You have a whole mythology behind this too. Where does that kind of play into this?
There was this whole crazy fantasy mythology that I already kind of had the bare bones framework for. It wasn't until like while I was developing Anthromancer, I listened to the great courses on world mythology.
Okay.
There's it's a Ghanaian epic called the Dowsey, and you don't hear a lot about African mythology. And it blew, it's one of those things where I was kind of like, wow, it's an incredibly moving story. The first movement of it is dark and crazy, and it's about this bard named Gasir who like sells his soul for vanity and fame. I know how mythology can be used to contain knowledge. Like, take important cultural information and encode it in a story and tell it to people was really moving to me and really human. It seems like a really ancient human thing, which, games, tarot. All these things are like human rituals that have this kind of value culturally. And so suddenly I got the idea that I was like, well, shoot, like what if, like I want to include this lore. I have this story, but I have no way to put it in there. But what if I just came up with like a simple myth? Like I don't need to go at length into, I don't have to like worry about characterization and dialogue. Like the thing about myths is that they're just archetypes, what this archetype of masculinity versus this archetype of femininity and this archetype of power, like when they interact and this is the story, what does that say about the human spirit? What can you learn from it? The myth that's actually going to be packaged in the box, and this isn't, I haven't posted this on the website yet, includes a section that explores the tenets of sacred geometry.
I mean, I think that is the beauty of mythology in general, because like you said, it's not like a fully fledged story. It's a series of archetypes. And if you choose to read into it, you also still get to have this very organic experience. The thing is, you're working in so many different worlds at the same time, and yet it's working. You have a game, you have a divination system, you have a mythology, and it all does tie in well. None of it seems strained.
Thank you. Yeah, that was tricky.
You said something during one of your dragonfruit videos where you mentioned that the purpose is not so much to foretell a future, but to recognize blind spots and grow into a better version of yourself. And I've always thought that really is the biggest benefit of any divination system. But it kind of seems like it is mirroring your process as well, where the more you go into the esoteric, the more this becomes, the greater tool this becomes. And it seems like it could very well be an experience that, players or users could get out of it as well.
Like that, what you just said, the idea that people, as they explore the game, every component in the game will become more valuable to them because it's working on their brain differently. That's like a weird side effect. Like that was not into all the decisions I made was like, oh, that'd be cool. Oh, that'd be cool. Oh, that'd be cool. And then at the end of it, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That's, whoa.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like, as a creator, it sounds like the dream. Like creating something that people can really put into practical application and learn something new and better themselves through it. Let's kind of get right back to the material itself. What exactly is Anthromancy?
That's a great question. So Anthromancy was it was a throwaway term that I started playing with. I was playing a lot of music. I was playing a lot of underground, I was an underground rapper. I was playing in a rock band. And I thought about Anthromancy in terms of getting people to come to your shows.
Okay.
I grew up playing Final Fantasy, and I grew up, and so there's already this understanding of the suffix mancy, and anthro or anthropo for human. The idea being, oh, you could, a person that's really good at getting people to at networking or getting people to come to your shows or using social media is kind of like an anthromancer. Like people are a magical force. That was the thought, and then it just went away, and then I lived my life, and then for whatever reason, I actually remember very distinctly I was pretty high, and then the word anthromancer came back to mind, and I was like, whoa, that would be such a good name for it. Like, after I came up with the word, or, decided to use the word for the product, then I started to learn a lot more about the definition of magic, the definition of, effectively, you could make a very compelling argument that putting together a product and putting it in a box and putting it in somebody's life is casting a spell. That I have taken my creative impulse to create a very specific collection of runes and images and give it to somebody in such a way that it changes their life one way or another. I mean, even if it wasn't aspiring for this crazy esoteric nonsense, it would still do that because, you give somebody a game and they get some of their friends to come over and they all sit down around a table. Well, look, they just had an experience they wouldn't have had if not for that thing. You've changed the world.
I think that's a really incredible way to look at it, that, and I think, honestly, magic has a much more practical application than a lot of people will give it credit for necessarily. So to be able to do something like that with the intention and say that, now this thing that I've created is going to change your life as well, that really absolutely is a kind of magic all its own. The fact that you're kind of giving it to others in this way is a really beautiful sentiment, too. Continuing on the theme of names here, why dragonfruit? I'm very curious.
I'm glad you asked. So you're familiar with tarot?
Correct.
I wanted to come up with a name that was, I guess, honored the heritage of the system, because it works fundamentally differently than tarot does. It has a different mechanism for attaining meaning and all that sort of thing. But I learned the history of the word tarot comes from tarocchi, which was an Italian word for a blood orange. So dragon fruit is a different kind of fruit. It's a different kind of fruit with a different kind of flavor. But it's I'm very clever. I'm so clever.
That's very interesting. I like that. I mean, I was totally rolling that over going, is it the seeds? Is it the skin? Like, what about the dragon fruit? But I like that a lot better, actually.
Well, and also, one thing that you might not have noticed, the Anthromancer logo is supposed to be an extremely stylized, bisected dragon fruit. It's got the pentagram in the middle, but then those points on the edges are the leaves on the outside of the dragon fruit skin.
So you say that it does work fundamentally differently than tarot, and I think that it's interesting that you point out that difference, because when I was watching you use it, there are parallels, and then there are very big differences. You have a die to represent your archetypes, you have a die to represent your experiences, and then you have a die to represent the conflict that is, I guess, being read about. The archetypes and experiences definitely seem to mirror the major and minor arcana of the tarot. When I was watching you use the system, astrology came up so often in my mind, as far as, you have these archetypes, you have the experience that they're speaking to, and then they are technically altered by the placement of them. If you weren't studying astrology specifically for this process, you totally tapped into that.
I looked into the history of tarot. I looked into the I Ching, the Book of Changes, at length, which was really informative as far as, developing an oracle system. I dipped my toes in, and enough to, the hymns, our system's arcana, are directly correlated to astrological signs. A lot of these systems, they've been in development for literally thousands of years. So for something like this, if this product comes out and people like it and it's successful, well, shoot, let's do a freaking dragon fruit book and let's dig into that. Let's get into the astrology, and I'm looking forward to that.
You definitely wouldn't need to go very far to really incorporate it, because there's already so much inherent in it. On that note, you mentioned that you started this whole thing as a huge skeptic. Mm-hmm. What did you where does your skepticism fall into place now? Are there still things that you're very skeptical about, or are you a little bit more open here?
One of the main motifs in Anthromancer is we have gestures, like a 0 and a 00, kind of like the beginning and end of the Fool and the World, in a sense. It's the Fool and the Fox in Anthromancer. The Fool and the Fox has really, the dichotomy between them has really come to be a great expression of the way I think about myself and about the world and about skepticism in general. Probably the most valuable lesson I've learned through the development of this, through life in general, is that, I'm a freaking idiot. If somebody comes to me and tells me, oh, I astral projected, and it's I can be as skeptical as I want about that. And I am, I think that there's a lot to be said about the brain fooling itself into thinking things that are real aren't real, or vice versa. But also, what do I really know about the universe? And how do I know that the brain fooling itself into thinking something that isn't real isn't real? You know what I mean? Fundamentally, and even if who gets to decide what's real, and does it have a real effect on the world? If I hallucinate that I've gone and talked to Gandhi or something, and now I live my life differently as a result, where do you draw the line between real and not real? And is it really that useful to? And especially with the world we have today, one of the things that I think about a lot is deep fakes. We have artificial intelligence algorithms that are already capable of generating fake news articles, fake video. At a certain point, that's going to be good enough that nobody's going to tell us when that's actually being implemented, Truth is, as uncomfortable as it makes a lot of people feel, kind of dead. And I guess there's a sort of, you have to go through a mourning process because all your illusions are shattering, and your grasp on this real world that was actually just your imagination comes tumbling down. But at the end of it, if you're able to be humble, if you're able to say, I'm the fool, I am a fool. That's the key to enlightenment, in my opinion. Like, the key to enlightenment is being able to recognize that how much you got a meat brain. You're a monkey. You climbed out of a tree. How much can you really know about how this gigantic infinite universe works? And are you letting your ideas about how much you think you know keep you from loving other people? Because if so, maybe you should check yourself.
Sometimes it's like, is it that serious? So you did a great job integrating all the different parts, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
I appreciate the opportunity to, because, like, you know, developing something like this for years and years and years, and it's just like in my head, it's really gratifying to finally be at a point where I can share it in a form that other people are getting excited about it.
Even if you're watching this after the Kickstarter has ended, I really recommend you go and check out Daniel's work and the whole system, because it's really something special. You can find all the information below, and I can't wait to see where this goes.